Catholic Martyrs of the Spanish Civil War by Fray Justo Perez de Urbel. Chapter 17. The Ignored Martyr. There is one terrifying case that is known to very few people. Neither life history, nor customs, nor family, nor friends, nothing seems to be known about the man who died with the serenity and courage that will be seen in this story. It took place in Toledo. Nothing more is known except the testimony of his martyrdom, which by chance has come down to us. So Toledo produced 5 brilliant pages. There are no exact dates known. That man, surprised in the city of Tagus by the Marxist domination, where he knew nobody, was regarded as a suspicious character right from the beginning. After he had been imprisoned, a militia went up to him and said, "As soon as we establish that you are a fascist, a priest, or something like that, you can get ready." Ready for what? For what we are going to do to you. Kill you. Then you will learn how to die, the man replied. That was a fatally imprudent reply. Wielding his rifle like a club, the militiaman knocked out the prisoner with a blow on his back. It was not the last brutal attack. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. He was invited to make a statement, the usual interrogation farce. This was the first he was subjected to, and it took place with all the usual unimaginable horrors, including blows, threats, and all the other methods of the Reds well known to the reader. Unfortunately, as we said before, we lack the information to trace even a superficial biography of this man. Returned to the prison after he had adequately answered his captor's offensive questions, the fury against him reached unbelievable heights. And yet again, as always, came the terrible, tragic invitation: blaspheme. But that man of extraordinary combative spirit would not agree to be a submissive victim, but confronted his enemies as follows: "You are cowards." "You know what we are going to do to you?" "I imagine so. I have already told you that you are cowards." They took him out of the prison and led him to the banks of the Tagus. "You are going to suffocate to death. Blaspheme, and we will let you go for the time being." "I would rather die in the river." Then something happened that is hair-raising to write about even now. The militia moved away a little from the prisoner and had a conference. Eventually they came to a decision. 2 out of 6 returned to the prison. The others stayed on guard. Half an hour later, the 2 returned with another prisoner. They confronted both of them. One of the militia said to the new arrival, "You are going to die. Your time has come. We shall tie your hands behind your back, and then you will have your head held under the water until you drown, all right?" The prisoner, middle-aged and pale as death, made no answer. Slowly, calculating the effect of their actions, they made their preparations. They tied his wrists behind his back with a wire. Next, very slowly, they tied his feet together, inhibiting any possible movement. They dragged him down to the river. He began to shout for help, in an agony of terror. The militia, unperturbed, continued dragging him down to the water, without hurrying, well aware of the effect they were producing on the principal performer in the matter. The prisoner who had been left behind looked on in silence at that wretched individual who was on the verge of madness. Although we cannot know exactly what he was thinking, we can form some idea on the basis of his previous behavior. He would assume that the intentions of the militia, whatever they may be, would be realized as regards their victim. Of that there could be no possible doubt. The victim's moral resistance had hit bottom, and imminent death had such a dire effect on him that he was probably no longer responsible for his actions. On reaching the river, a militiaman grasped his head between his 2 hands and pulled it under the water. One could see the agonizing spasm with which the body of the wretched fellow fought back. After a minute they released his head from the water. He cried like a child with a noisy, desperate sobbing. Then one of the militia said to him, "Blaspheme, or next time your head will stay underwater until you drown." The prisoner said nothing. He was too terrified to speak. Once again the militia spoke to him. "It's your choice. Blaspheme or die with your head under the water. Do what you like, but get on with it. We are not going to stay here watching you for an hour." Then, suddenly, the prisoner blasphemed horribly. Then the militia released his bonds and said to him, "You're free. Come with us afterwards, and we will give you a party identity card." And the blasphemer went on crying. Then the militia turned to the terrified witness of the appalling scene, about as frightful as could be contrived, and said to him, "I hope you have been convinced that we mean what we say. What about it?" But there was no reply. "Watch what you're doing. We're beginning to get tired of you." Again, silence was the only reply. They decided to act. Using the same bonds that had served to tie up the other fellow, they tied up his hands and feet and dragged him down to the water. "For the last time, imbecile, will you or won't you blaspheme?" Silence. They put his head in the river. A minute later, the same procedure as before. "What do you say now?" The victim struggled to breathe, distressed, and paying no attention to anything else. Once again the choice was presented to him. "Right, friend. What do you say? You must decide if you want to drown threshing around with your legs. Choose quickly, because we are in a hurry." Silence. They repeated the procedure. They took him out again. Again they questioned, and again silence. Several times they did this, followed by the same questionings. Every time silence. At last the militia got tired of the game. Probably they did not dare to drown him because they did not have the authority to do so, or perhaps they just wanted to prolong the martyrdom. They showered blows and insults on him, completely out of control, in their efforts to get him to give in. Nevertheless, however many blows they rained down on him, they couldn't get a word or a groan out of him. He who had shown himself so hostile to his tormentors, showing outstanding courage, suddenly said not a word. The previous scene, the most dreadful that he had seen in his life, had convinced him to seal his lips. His courage took another form now. We might suggest a few explications, but this would get us tied up in the subtleties and divert us from the bare facts that must be related. After a ferocious beating, they decided to return to the city. But then they remembered the other prisoner. They lifted him up from the ground where he lay stretched out like a corpse. "Well, have you got over your fright?" They all burst out laughing. One of them, the most wicked, of sinister appearance, said to the group, "In spite of everything, I think we ought to kill him. What do you think?" The prisoner referred to grew agitated with the remembrance of having his head submerged. The militiamen pressed his point with his companions. "But you promised me you would let me go free. You must keep your promise." "Listen, coward, why are you talking about promises? You've saved your life. Don't kill me, only if you blaspheme again." And again the horrible apostasy. The conclusion followed quickly. The militia who had spoken to him last grabbed a pistol and shot him through the chest. The surviving prisoner was returned to prison. He was put into a cell by himself. Every morning at the changing of the guard at daybreak, the outgoing guard paid him a visit to beat him up. After 4 or 5 days of this, he was terribly disfigured. Weakened, with trembling limbs, broken ribs, bruises and wounds covering his entire body, he was a shadow of what he had been physically just a few days before. But now we have seen an inexplicable piece of information. Since he had seen how a companion of misfortune had abused God in his attempt to save his life after the shameful scene at the Tagus, he said not a word. The fury of his captors knew no bounds. They did not just want him to explain himself, to blaspheme, to show that he supported the revolution. They just wanted to hear a word from him, just one, but they didn't manage it. What power there is in silence, how eloquent for us. Day after day, the unknown martyr suffered everything that a stupid, degenerate mind could conceive. One day he vomited blood. One day, we do not know the date, on the whim of an ill-tempered jailer, they shattered his skull with a rifle butt. But before dying, he spoke again. He said, "I go to Christ." Any appreciation that we might add would upset the beauty of one of the most extraordinary deaths.